All right, everyone. So we're going to go through a betting preview for the Knicks Spurs game one. All right. So the Spurs coming into this game are 4.5 point favorites. And, one of the interesting things about this is there's a lot of talk about the rest, right? Obviously, the Spurs just went through a gruesome 7 game series, and the Knicks, they swept the Cavs, right? They really had one game where they were down big, able to come back and win that one, and they were fine. And to me, that is really the story of this game one, which is I just think the Knicks are going to come in a little bit rusty, right? There's like no question in my mind that at some point here, the Knicks are going to come into this game rusty. Now, whether that's enough for the Spurs to win and to cover, we'll see. But I'm going to be rolling, in terms of the spread with the Spurs -4.5. It just makes too much sense to me. Where the Knicks are going to come in, I think they're just going to be a step slow, right? And even though the Spurs didn't, they just had this tough series. Well, why don't you take a look at how long they've had to rest in between Saturday and what is going to be Wednesday, right? That's a good amount of rest. It's not like you're playing the next. If it was a thing where they got one rest day and then you're out there, maybe I could see it. But the Knicks have been resting way too long, in my opinion. I do think that's what's going to be enough. So going down and looking at the points, for props, there's a few things here. The first one is with Wemby. Look, his line is set at 28, but the problem is with Wemby is that there is just such a I can't remember a superstar that, especially, as talented as Wemby, who's has kind of the point differential, like the discrepancy between how much he could have and what he may have than Wemby. The line's at 28 because he could go for another 40 in game one, like he did against the Thunder. He could also not go for 40 and go for like 15. Right? I mean, that is kind of the discrepancy we're talking about. And so at 28, I just don't love I should say this. I don't love it because I think they're going to be so locked in on Wemby, right? They're just going to be looking at him the entirety of the time, trying to find ways to stop him. I don't know if points, especially in game one, is going to be where I'd go with him. Now, Brunson and Cat are a little bit different, right? So for Brunson, the worry and the concern is he's going to have Castle on him most likely. And if Stephon Castle is guarding you, we saw what he did to Shea, right? He just completely made life miserable for Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. You're not going to stop somebody of the caliber of Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. It's just not going to happen, right? You're not going to shut him down completely, but you're going to make him a little bit less efficient, which is what Castle did all series. And you'll worry about that, especially in a game one with Brunson, where if can Castle just make Brunson a little bit less efficient, right? Can he make him in his ability to score a little bit harder? And at 26 plus, I don't think there's much there. Now, for Carl Anthony Towns, this is another, like I said, interesting one because there's two ways of looking at this. And I do think these props come down to who you think is going to win the game, right? If you think the Knicks are going to come out and really put together a good game, then you want to be going with some Knicks players. If you think the Spurs, like I think, are going to come out and kind of dominate just because of too long of a rest, then you go with the Spurs players. But for Cat, he's an interesting story because obviously Cat's a guy that could score 30. You put up 30 very easily, right? And if you watch that Thunder series, if they choose to have Wemby on Cat, which they might actually not, right? I've heard they may put him on like Josh Hart and stuff like that, and maybe they will. But Cat is going to be hanging. He's been hanging out at the like a mid range 3 point line because he's been able to stretch the floor and he's been really moving the ball. Wemby, even if let's say he is guarding Towns, they're going to use that to take Wemby out of the paint. And if Wemby overhelps, you saw this all the time in the Thunder series. If you have guys over helping, and I shouldn't say over helping in the sense of like they weren't supposed to do it. No, legitimately helping, right? Like they're supposed to. Cat could get some really good looks. So I actually think there is some value. I don't love Brunson or Wemby's points in this. There may be some value in something with Cat in this one, right? Because I do think he's going to get some of those looks, especially if they decide that they're not going to put Wemby on him. If you don't put Wemby on him, he could really, really go off, right? This might be kind of the reverse of what we saw in the last series where, Cat was more of a facilitator in a sense. And then we actually, I like the Spurs, but I'm kind of talked myself into maybe betting Carl Anthony Towns points because I just to say it again, I do think there's a world in which he does pretty well in this one just because if he's just going to be getting those looks, especially if Brunson is being guarded by Castle and all of that. All right, Anobi's the next one. He's in the same boat in my view as Carl Anthony Towns, where you just expect that there's going to be especially if Brunson's attacking the rim and if they're really trying to key in on Brunson, Anobi's going to get his looks. I don't know if they're going to go full Shea in this, right? I don't know if they're going to say, look, that's what they said in the OKC series, right? We're going to double this guy at times. I don't know if they're going to do that to Brunson. I think there's a chance that they feel that, Brunson's a little bit undersized, so maybe Castle can just handle him a little bit better one on one, and they're not going to give up a bunch of open threes. Anobi is a guy, if they do start doubling him, look for him too. But I don't like him in this game. I think Towns is more of a play in this one over him. Castle, it's tough because I definitely could see it, right? It really comes down to who is Brunson going to be guarding, and Brunson gives ultimate effort on defense, but he's not a great defender. And so if Castle, God, if Brunson was guarding Castle, I think you'd like his 18 plus, his 20 plus points. But I'm not entirely locked in on that either at this point. De'Aaron Fox, once again, I don't think he's going to be seeing Brunson. And if, look, you got to pick your spots with him, right? This line of 16 is different than this Wemby at 28 in the sense of this is, in my view, value when he's at his best, right? Wemby, even when he's at his best, 28 points is not necessarily a ton of value, right? He's not going to be going for 40 points all the time. So getting, or even 30, he does a little bit of everything. And when defenses are keying in on you the way they do Wemby, I just don't love that. But for Fox, there's going to be games in this series where I think he can climb this ladder, right? I do think he can climb this ladder. Uh, Bridges, Vassell, Hart, and Champagny, all role players here, right? And you wonder, one of these games, if they do put Wemby on Josh Hart, you wonder if Josh Hart has some big games. I don't know if it's going to be big game one, but if they lose game one, is it game two? Is it game three? I'm going to be watching this game with, I'm going to be locked in a sense on that, right? And the same for Vassell and Champagny. Those guys, each one of them, I expect to have one big game. It's about finding that game. And so, like, if Josh Hart goes off in this game, I'm going to be probably not betting him for a couple of games, right? Now, if he has a bad one, I'm going to be looking at him next game and maybe even the game after, right? Because I think if Wemby is on him, it is because they're putting Wemby on Josh Hart. If they, like I said, do end up doing that, not because they need to stop Josh Hart with him, but so he can help out and kind of protect the paint. That means Hart is going to get a lot of good looks, I think. And he's going to be, one of these games, I expect him to hit him. Champagny, Vassell, Bridges is another one. We talked about it with Fox. Look, this is value for Bridges. The problem is that you just don't know how many looks per night he's going to get, right? Someone of Bridges' caliber, he's going to have a game where he goes for 20 plus if the Knicks make this a series, right? If this thing ends up going 7 games, I expect him to have one big game. It's about us guessing which one that is. And so for this one, I don't think that's going to be the game, but down the line, I do. So same with, this series to me has a ton of value because you have Harper and Keldon Johnson, right? Those are two guys who at some point are going to make a big impact, right? Are going to make a big impact off the bench. You just have to pick your spots with them. And I think Harper, this could be another game for him, especially if this thing gets away from the Knicks. They put in Harper, maybe for the kind of in between garbage time, and he can cook. And we're getting him at 11 plus here, right? That's, so we're talking about a ladder, right? You could ladder this thing up to 20. I think there's a possibility. I don't know if it's going to be this game, but I don't hate throwing that in there. Keldon Johnson's the same. I don't think for this game though, but future series, keep your eyes on them. Shamit, you just got to pick what game he goes off. That's kind of the tough one, and I don't think that's this one. Mitchell Robinson, I wish he didn't get hurt because I do think that right now, if you look at last series, Cornette had Cornette not have had that block he had. That was one of the worst series I've seen from Blue Cornet ever. That was a terrible series from him. He was one of the worst players I've seen in quite some time in terms of he was like non-existent on the floor for that entire series. They when he was on the floor, it was bad basketball. And then of course he has the one, chase down block and what ends up happening. Now everybody's like, what a series from Cornette, right? But there was really that one block and it was huge, don't get me wrong. But everything else was terrible. But Mitchell Robinson, I think that could work in his favor in a sense because if I was the Knicks, as soon as they sit Wemby, I would be attacking Cornette with whether it's Brunson and Robinson pick and roll or Cat pick and roll. I would get Cornette in some sort of action on every play because I think he might be injured. To be completely honest with you, because he had like some hamstring thing. I remember him being on the injury report before the series coming into game one. That I didn't really see it again, but he looked like he was injured. And so Mitchell Robinson, if he didn't have that injury, I look to him a little bit more, I think, but certainly there's a chance with him. All right, so for rebounds, Wemby is weird when it comes to rebounding. We're not going to go through individually each one. We'll just kind of broadly talk about maybe some players we like, but Wemby is weird in the sense I've never seen a guy as big as him. Remember, he put up 21 rebounds in the first game of last series. But then you look throughout the series and you're just like, defensively, he is not a dominant rebounder all the time, right? Like, it was funny because for a large chunk of game seven, the Spurs were getting dominated on the glass. And then finally, Wemby picked it up. Finally, Wemby was able to, get boards on the defensive end. So yeah, he could have 20 boards. He very well can because he can get offensive rebounds so much, but it just doesn't seem like he's always locked in on getting them. And they have like two or three guys that are constantly, you know, um, rebounding against him, right, and trying to box him out almost. So to me, I would be hesitant on when I bet his rebounds and I try to pick my spots. But this is why you look at guys like Fox that have these well, actually four is still a lot, but you look at some of these smaller totals and maybe you don't hate some of those numbers. Um, we come down to threes. Anybody I really like, I just think with the Spurs, especially, it's take your pick, right? Of who's going to be the guy tonight. Fox can hit a bunch. Wemby can hit a bunch. Champagny can hit a bunch. Vassell can hit a bunch. Josh Hart is going to have a game where he hits a bunch. It's about just choosing kind of the right games. And I don't think this game is the Josh Hart game. As I said, I don't know if it's a Champagny game either because we just saw him go off. Um, Maybe it's Harper, right? I wouldn't hate Harper. Maybe it's Keldon Johnson, but kind of a lot of what we're talking about here, the bets we have going into this series are more of a game one. I'm keeping my betting slate a little bit smaller just because I want to see how the series looks, right? I want to see how matchups looks. It doesn't matter. I'm not saying like one guy went off, that means he's going to go off the next game. It's not that. It is who got wide open looks and missed five wide open looks in this one, right? Like if Josh Hart is 0 of 5 from 3 or something, then you go, it wasn't this game, but in the next game, he may be. So thank you all for watching. We're going to do more of these betting previews going forward, and we'll see you next time.